All right, so welcome to my panel. Something's a little queer. How queerness is changing games media. That is my Twitter handle. Unfortunately, be useless for us here. But I'm going to talk about kind of games journalism, game media, the blogosphere around the media, and kind of how things are changing a little bit, and how queerness is affecting that. Is that working? Oh, sweet. Okay, cool. So a little bit about myself. I am a games critic and designer, consultant, and academic, and many other things. But the main things I'd like to talk about are my games criticism. I've been blogging since August 2000, I think 11, which is not very long, but I have been doing a lot of work to talk about queer issues, diversity issues in the media about games when very little of it was being done. So I've been kind of accidentally an activist, actually, doing some things in games and hoping that I can talk to some both bigger publications and companies about addressing these diversity issues. I'm also a designer. My first game was released last year, my Nietzsche. It is currently on exhibit at the Museum of Design in Atlanta, which is awesome. And if y'all happen, thank you. If y'all happen to be passing through Atlanta for the next month in August, it's going to be on exhibit there, along with it's part of the XYZ exhibit, which is all games designed by women. So if you happen to be going there, you should definitely check it out. So queer. What do I mean when I say queer? And unfortunately, I'm not going to tell you that because that's a word that everyone has kind of their own personal journey with. But I want to tell you what I mean when I say it as I go through this conversation. I kind of see queer more as non-normative, seen as the outside, the push to the margins, and very often I think people are kind of confused when we use this word because they're like, wasn't that a bad word one day? And now we've kind of reclaimed that and use that to show how we had an outsider status and how we do things differently and how we can critique the normative. So here's kind of like a little bit of what I consider of queer. I don't see it as a binary. I see that we have a whole bunch of identities, and we only tend to focus on a couple of them. So, like, kind of in this picture right here, in our games, we tend to just have to be focusing on, like white men as our protagonists and such. But there's a whole bunch of other stories, and unfortunately, we have a perception in the industry and in the media that we have to put extra effort in order to either recognize them or create them or critique them. And really, there is no extra effort. It's just that we're so used to ignoring them that it seems that way. So I don't necessarily think that, being queer is going to, let's say, I don't know, be a binary thing. And I also think it's kind of an unfortunate consequence that white men or white straight men also can't have queer experiences. I think that's a very terrible stereotype and thought that doesn't allow an involved discussion. So kind of the way, and I don't know how this is showing up over there, but kind of a way to show things that have, when I see queerness, is very often in modding. So I like to show the example of kind of in Mass Effect 1 and 2, how people like spread the knowledge of, well, we can't have gay relationships, but here's how you can actually, edit things so you can actually have that. So I remember the kind of fandom that kind of came out of modding Mass Effect so you can have same-gender relationships. And that kind of thing happens all the time in games where people edit games to better represent themselves, and when developers won't do it. And then there's always a pushback to when diversity does come into games and people want to whitewash it, quite literally sometimes. Like this is a mod to make Isabella in Dragon Age 2 to make her fair-skinned, because people did not like that someone who was attractive was darker skinned. So this was a mod that kind of came out to rectify it in their perspective. And that's kind of how we show that there is this actually very live like discussion, discourse, and movement that is fan-based. It's not necessarily like academics who are making things more queer. It's not necessarily, game developers who have this thing. There's actually on the ground level. Just kind of like a quick raise of hands. Like, how many of you have played a game and it was kind of the first time that you felt that you could, exhibit queerness in some way? Yeah, me too. So it's kind of like, we don't necessarily want or need things to be explicitly like, this is for you, in order for our identity to exist, and that sort of thing has been going on all the time. So pray tell, Mattie, why are you telling us all this? And I want to tell you how that sort of mentality of getting ourselves into the main narrative, or even just into the spotlight, how that's happening into the media. Right now, the media, when it comes to games journalism, is typically news, previews, and reviews, which I'm just realizing all have "ews" in them, and that's how I feel about all those things. But basically, you have some things like features and editorials that go into the, maybe the news section. But overall, this games journalism is meant to inform people as consumers. And I actually have a big issue with that, because people who play games are not just consumers. They're people, and sometimes they can't afford games. And we all know that minorities are disproportionately affected by classism and are poor. And that is one reason, a big reason why we don't see a lot of queerness in, like, say, discussing LGBT issues, or kind of a lot of discussion about, let's say, feminism, et cetera, is because people think that this minority is not enough of a market, are not worth enough money to take a risk to do these things. So you can see that's why a lot of in journalism, we are not having that, if people are like, well, why aren't things coming out? It's because they don't view you as a market. And so what's really unfortunate is that all of our writing right now only wants to address the things that consumers do, and very often leaves out, queer voices. So something came along a while ago, I guess, called New Games Journalism, and it's actually reminiscent of kind of gonzo journalism that happened kind of like in the 60s, where basically journalists did things from their personal perspective and showed like kind of how something from their own eyes informs the audience about something. So that's been around for a while, but something kind of really interesting happened in games journalism, because in something that was kind of like a product, basically a product publication, would come these things about personal experience and kind of feelings or whatever, that's what people like, memoirish type things. And this was still kind of in the dominance of white men for the most part, who will talk about their feelings about Zelda when they were 6 years old. And that got very tired very quickly. But I think something is going on now within, like, let's say the past 2 years or so that I think is quite interesting. I'm not quite sure how well you can read that, but there's been a whole bunch of great writers coming out using the personal experience to inform us about games. So here's a couple of writers I really admire: Maddie Myers, Jen Frank, Kara Ellison, Patricia Hernandez, and Lana Polanski. They all are all women, and they tend to use their personal experience to inform readers something that wouldn't normally come up in a consumerist publication. Kind of like how rape actually, when used as an expletive to put down other people, that means something to someone who is very likely to get, more likely to get raped than the people who are being pitched as consumers. Or kind of, a woman's perspective on why she likes to play violent video games and how that intersects with her. And the thing is that this is really important, because right now our cultural narrative, the standard narrative is, okay, well, here's how, straight white guys do, and we'll only do that. But that means we're not getting the whole picture about the things that we're doing, what these things represent. And so I think it's really interesting that we have all these personal narratives coming out, because now we have, okay, so we know that means something to consumers. What does this mean to everyone else we're leaving out? And how can we maybe, address that? here are some characters that I've written about that I feel like I've given new perspective to. An interesting story of how I got into games journalism is that I was doing a research paper on gender and sexuality, and how I found next to nothing about transgender characters. And this was a while after Persona 4 had come out already. And I'm like, why is no one talking about Naoto from Persona 4? Like, this is very, I don't know, juicy topic. And so I had done some of my research, and I had just written this entire thing about that character. And it was extremely informative because people who are cisgender are just not gonna notice if something is wrong, right? Because they don't have that personal experience. And I don't have to only address people who are my identity. I like to look at certain games like the Dragon Age series and how there's like this interesting tension between the mages and the Templars, and how that seems very similar to LGBT versus religion in our own society. In activism, the activist perspective is extremely absent from media. And why I find these things important is because every single time I put it out, people are just like, I never thought about this. And a developer will come to me like, I had no idea that this could possibly say something like that to a person of any sort. And so if we continue to consider like the LGBT people who are not white, or et cetera, to be not part of a viable market, we're just gonna continually leave them out. So also Twitter has been an extreme boon, and some people would say curse, to this dialogue because Twitter has very little barrier to entry. You have a whole bunch of people who can talk on equal level as developers. All of a sudden people will be like, wow, there's a whole community of social justice games activists. Like, I remember the first time I told my women's studies program at my undergrad that I was in social justice for games, and they gave me like the weirdest look. They're like, what are you talking about? Like, is it possible that anyone who's not a misogynist and homophobe that exists in games? And what like a terrible thing for like a social justice group to think. Like, if even people think that way, that's terrible. So what was great about Twitter was that you got like these people, and I must say that like Geek Social Justice is probably one of the best social justice groups I've ever met, like the most welcoming, wonderful people. And so if anybody wants to get involved, I previously wrote for the Border House, and that community around there is super awesome and a great like primer to get into it. But what was great for me is that, especially if you're ever looking to get into games media, Twitter is a great way to have a dialogue with a writer that you really respect, and actually maybe get their attention if you say something interesting. And so for me, I was kind of in the middle of applying for schools, and I kind of just used Twitter and blogging to open up dialogue to larger media publications about these issues. And we can see that. We can see that the media is becoming a lot more savvy about picking up sexism and homophobia and other types of marginalization. This is a timeline of sexism that happened in 2012. And you may notice that there's a lot of it. And unfortunately, that's only a month. Yeah, and so that was actually, this is a project led by Getz, who's one of the people who organizes Fat, Ugly, or Slutty, Grace. And she helps with the crowdsourcing to show this timeline of like, because very often people will just say, oh, that thing is just an isolated incident. And it's like, no, actually, we have this large timeline of terrible behavior. And so what's happening right now is that the media is becoming a little bit more savvy of being like, okay, I detect sexism, I detect whatever, let's start talking about it. And so now when you see some of things in previews and such, that topic will come up. Recently, if anybody follows the whole thing with Dragon Crown right now, and some people responding to its gross sexist art, basically, and how that's becoming like a dialogue. So the media is kind of learning how to deal with all these issues. So it's not like these memoir type writing is really not doing anything. It's just been building up and up. And maybe you noticed last year, if you're kind of involved with like watching Twitter or something, that all these topics exploded. Like last E3, there was a whole bunch of stuff, and one reason why, and everything like that. Not a coincidence, I don't think. So unfortunately, not everything is so happy about this. So all this writing that I'm talking about is very often not paid. These are people who are individual bloggers who are trying to raise awareness, and the kind of very like dwindling resources that publications have aren't really there to give minorities an into this industry to actually have their writing sustained. And it's quite awful because there are so many people whose writing is like vital to this conversation, and we all notice that. But they're starting to like drop off the map because, you know, they're unsupported. And I imagine by seeing kind of like, you know, a good size in this room that you all want to learn about this, and that actually maybe not a lot of people know what's going on. If anybody's ever, you know, heard the whole like, where's the Robert Ebert of video games, and that terrible, you know, like where's all that? And the idea that that actually is going on, and a lot of those people are actually minorities. And so you, just kind of like in the interest of this conference, we should be very interested in what's going on right now, because, you know, the great, you know, video game critic is probably a woman or is probably queer. And, you know, that's a great thing to, you know, maybe have a step forward to show that maybe our industry can do better than others. I think that would be a nice thing. So I wanted to go through and show like maybe what you can do. And right now what's interesting is this kind of relationship between fandom and, you know, reading words basically online, and kind of the idea of like we've kind of conditioned ourselves that, you know, reading stuff shouldn't cost money. Unfortunately, people need money in order to write and eat so they can write. And so I want to kind of go through a little bit of things of what you guys can do as fans. So if you can, pay for what you like. And if someone like wrote something awesome and you go through and like kind of search like what does this person do, and you really like it, find a way to just like tip them or something. Many people who are bloggers have like individual donation pages, and you can just throw like $5 or whatever. And that just kind of shows that not only that you like want them just to feel a little bit better about their financial situation, but that you find that they are viable, and, you know, you prove to other people who can pay actual wages that, you know, this can do, you know, this is viable. But if you can't, because all of us can, you know, pitch in money, like share the hell out of that. Like really, like right now in like we're talking about crowdfunding later on and all these other social campaigns, sharing is almost more like, you know, useful than actually donating, you know, on average is weird. It's a weird thing. But basically, if you share so much, basically the chance that you might connect to someone who is ridiculously interested is like way higher. And so as fans, being passionate about the things you like, you know, you already do that. You know, you go on forums, you play games or whatever. That should also go for the things that you consume, like media-wise, that kind of intellectually make you think, right? Like, so put some passion into that as well, because those people are going to be there, you know, champion things for you, and also to help you think and share resources to other people. Also, contacting writers is, especially when you're polite, is a really, really good thing. I can't tell you how many nice things have actually saved my day, and, you know, not made me like delete an entire thing because I was just so frustrated. Making sure that people know that even that you've just read it, like I read it and it made me think, is a really fine email, you know, like literally, because sometimes when it comes to these people who are blogging, they feel like maybe no one is reading their stuff, because some people like to tell them, well, you know, you're so insulated or you're so niche that no one reads yours. But something tells me that most people aren't terrible commenters, right? Like I imagine that the majority of society is not terrible commenters. But the bad thing about being the silent, nodding, positive majority is that you're silent. And that makes you invisible, basically. So don't be invisible. Make your input in somewhere. And also very, 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 very important is to email the editors of the sites that you like and tell them you want more minority perspectives in your feed. Basically, you know, like hey, I noticed that, your entire masthead is white men. So how about you kind of like diversify that? And I know let me show you some examples of some of my favorite writers. Or you notice, hey, I noticed that the only people talking about sexism on your site are men. Do you mind getting some other perspectives? Because that's a very fair point, and it's a good way to kind of get more people into this conversation, get them paid. And the best thing about that is that editors and writers are looking for things, they're looking for what fans want. And if, let's say, a whole horde of fans just say, we want more feminism, I mean, you're gonna get it. I mean, that's a really weird thing to imagine, but we can do it, so like, let's try. What we can do as developers, or what you can encourage your developers to do. One thing I've noticed, I was recently just at a summit with a whole bunch of developers, and someone had said, okay, everyone, let's talk about the media. What are the media publications you know? And the developers didn't know any gaming publications. And I, as kind of an undercover media person, was like, what is going on here? Because the only way that you're going to know about feedback, about how your game, and how other games like yours are existing in this space, is by reading. And the best thing is to share, especially something that explains something very well. So let's say if you have a whole bunch of people on your team, or people that are programmers, and you think that maybe they get a little scared about the diversity issue or whatever, and you find something very well written that might explain it very well, share the hell out of that. Like, give that to people, because that's the only way they're going to understand that that dialogue is there and that they can participate in it. Developers also need to become a lot more comfortable about talking about diversity. And also, that also means that fans need to tell developers when they talk about diversity, you really appreciate it and you hope they do it more. Because having that conversation, making that more like of a natural conversation to have, is only a benefit. So if right now, when people talk about sexism, or if they mess up about something in public, it's very scary. Because right now, everyone thinks that the media and fans are just going to come and eviscerate them. But let's imagine if someone made a sexist error unintentionally in public, and was so cool, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that, let me learn. If that was the majority, that's ideal. Why wouldn't we want something like that? And also, developers should respond to well-written pieces, especially about their games, because it's a way that shows other publications that developers will not only be respecting those people who are probably unpaid, but also be looking for them as the kind of content they want. And that's a really good sign to get people okay, well, this person was so well written that all these developers, responded to them. I need that kind of person on my publication, because that's the best way to have that dialogue. That establishes trust, because there's a big media versus developer trust issue right now, and the more people that can talk between those people and get a good result, the better. And also for developers to not ignore smaller publication or individual blogs, because those are usually the ones taking the risks. Right now, you look at bigger publications like IGN and Kotaku and Polygon, and they're all doing their own little way to kind of, become more diverse, et cetera. But right now, it's the smaller blogs and the smaller bloggers who are actually saying the things that we want to hear, that is in our interest, and as an interest of fans too. Because these people are so passionate and they care so much that they're gonna be unfiltered, and they're gonna say as much of the honest truth they can. And I don't know what else people like us want right now. And if you're part of the media, and what you want to encourage to the media is to actively recruit minority writers. Right now, we have this kind of weird relationship with the term affirmative action or whatever. And the thing that's kind of terrible about that is that we just assume, oh, if they don't come, we can't recruit them. But right now, our publications, what they look like, that they'll be the most hostile place to women, queer people, whatever. If you have all these, articles that glorify, objectified women, how am I gonna feel safe working for you? What is that office banter going to sound like? I don't wanna be a part of that. So you're gonna have to actively show people and actively recruit to get them in there. We also need the media to pay attention to more non-commercial games. And this is really, really important for fans too, to recognize. Many games that come out that are really, really interesting, and I've done a lot of talks here, were for free. They didn't cost anyone anything, and they're super interesting and important. But the things that the media does not cover those because they don't get anyone money. And as you see, this whole like money cycle going on right now, what is happening in a queer space is going on free of charge right now, and that's a beautiful thing, and we need to celebrate that. We need to get those people known. So right now, like my game is going to be in a museum, and there's never been a write-up on it on any site that is a major publication right now. Like, what is going on, right? So that's kind of a shame. Seek out and cover more special interest events. So another unfortunate thing is that many interesting events, I go to a lot of conferences, the press is barely present there. And that's a real big shame, because that's when people can get into these interesting conversations, establish that trust, and kind of get more in-depth interviews. So here at GamerX, you're more likely gonna be able to have an interesting conversation with someone in like an unheated manner about diversity, right? Because everyone's kind of here for that reason. So why isn't every single publication here knocking on everyone's doors? It's because they don't find that this is gonna be of interest to the consumer, and that is very unfortunate, and that doesn't really reflect well. And also, we need to learn how to speak about diversity issues, but not speak for other people. So right now, we have a lot of like white straight men talking about queerness, non-whiteness, and women's issues, and that's just not gonna fly, because those people just don't know those experiences. They won't be able to tell you how it is. So unfortunately, we have that going on right now, but we can encourage those people to do more against that. But overall, we need a lot more just love, literally. And I know this is super hippie, but what's going on right now is there is a lot of negativity going on. There's a lot of pressure to succeed. There's a lot of pressure to live, literally. And we need just a lot more just positive vibes going on. And that's something that fans can do very, very easily. It's just being like, I enjoy your work. I really want to support you. Please let me know. And there's just nothing more that can help energize people who are having a hard time, especially when our industry is so risk adverse and we're doing something so risky. So I believe that is it. Thank you. So that was quicker than I thought. So I have room for questions if anybody wants questions. We have one question. Do we have multiple questions by chance? Oh, awesome, lots of questions. So yes, I will answer your questions.
Seeking out smaller publications. I was wondering if you had some recommendations aside from Borderhouse Blog, which is awesome.
Oh, great. Okay, so borderhouseblog.com is a smaller publication that is specifically about feminism, queer issues, etc. And it is also a great resource because it actually has links to Feminism 101. And I promise you, all of the people that you respect and like about that will love it if you direct other people to Feminism 101 posts, I promise. And also great sites like Critical Distance, so critical-distance.com is literally a weekly roundup of the best criticism. And they are an awesome team who is looking for diversity and will always include queer, non-white, non-American voices into their publications. So that's a very easy way to kind of find out who are all these people, talking. And also just kind of really weirdly try to tap into just Twitter and the blogs that are going on, because a lot of individual bloggers are kind of the thing. So once you catch one and you see, oh, these people are talking to each other, then let's follow that weird group of people and you'll eventually kind of find a whole bunch. Hopefully that helps.
So I have sort of a love-hate relationship with the written word.
Okay.
Is there any, I get most of my news and previews and stuff like that from YouTube. Are there any YouTube personalities that you could point me to, or otherwise maybe audio podcast type things?
Right. So I wish. Right now, what I can do is point you to particular people who tend to do those things. I'm trying to think. We don't do a lot of video criticism. So let me think about this. So right now there's a critical person called Aaron Signal, and he does kind of video criticism. And if you kind of follow his Twitter or whatever, he kind of interacts with all those people. Then of course Feminist Frequency, which you should be watching if you attend this conference. And also I think a lot more people need more encouragement for it, because I think there's a lot of people who are starting to get into that space. Like, I myself have done a video review of Depression Quest, and that went really well. And so if you can find me by my Twitter and just look at my stuff, I have that. And if I had a lot more people who are just like, can you please do video stuff or audio stuff, I'd probably say yes. I just haven't had enough people say that. So I think more people want to do those things, and I'm definitely thinking that we're going to be moving there. So maybe just hang on tight, and we'll get it.
With all of the LGBT issues that come up, not only in the gaming industry but also in the written word, do you have one topic that you like to tackle the most that you don't think is being tackled?
Oof, gosh, that sounds like just my job description. Right now, I like to think that right now what's not being talked about is how we embed personal experience into game design and into the craft of of how we write. So right now, something I'm very interested in is the idea of like translating personal experience into a game. So like, let's say not a game that has like a superficial story of a queer matter, but actually when you play it, you kind of internalize it. You know, the things you do like echo, and the things those are very effective. Some people might know about Games for Change, maybe a little bit, and basically it's like this large organization that does games specifically to do social change. And the one thing that I would like to critique them for is that they miss that. You know, instead, it's very obvious that we have people who are finding the way that AAA studios make games and then replicate that with a surface instead of like a very earnest game. I kind of like think about earnest games, about like, how do I get people to think about this? And that is a topic I wish was talked about a lot more. Yeah, I think I'm satisfied with that.
Hi, Mattie. I know you mentioned that you feel like the white heterosexual male doesn't really have, like they can't speak from personal experiences, and so maybe their attempts to speak, you know, for the minorities aren't really appropriate. That being said, I think that obviously we need those allies, and I think that those kinds of comments sometimes make it hard for those people to be allies because they fear criticism. What is the way in which the white heterosexual cis male can participate in the conversation responsibly and be comfortable with that?
Awesome, I'm really glad you asked that question. So one thing whenever people tell me, and one other large question that people ask me personally is, how do I make a game about an identity that's not me? That's a very touchy issue right now. And my question back is always, are you writing trying to understand someone else's perspective, or are you trying to tap into your personal relationship with that? Something I think, especially a game, would be great about this, but even just about written, is let's say, I told a writer friend of mine, I would love it if you talked about your personal relationship with homophobia as a heterosexual man and how that's informing your privilege and your ally and the complicated. Because I think about that an ally can really do is talk about privilege and how to kind of get there and understand, like, here's how I understand how I can help and kind of the mess ups I've done on the way. Because right now, a lot of people just feel like it's a binary. You're a feminist or you're not. And if you aren't, and you have to be there. And it's really weird in that way, because I think that people have different journeys of how I came to understand I was hurting people unintentionally, and how I've come to undo that. And there are no stories like that. There are nothing. And those are vital. And those are things that only people of privilege can do, right? So I really request people of privilege to talk about their own personal journeys, talk about, like, I made a mistake and here's how I came to undo that, and now I'm a helpful cause, right? Right now, I feel like people are trying to speak for others, and you as a privileged person, or anybody, because I'm privileged too, I have my own privileged things, me talking about how my relationship with my privilege is super important and informative, and unfortunately that's not something that people are doing right now. So that's my answer to that.
I have 2 points. Are you familiar with the No Homophobia Counter?
Maybe.
Homophobes.com.
Is that with the tweets?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the space of this conversation, there have been 8,000 posts of the word faggot. And so I hate it. Okay, I'm a Debbie Downer, so I have to say, how do we engage with media without that daunting us? And my second point is very relevant to this conference, straight white male, the lowest difficulty setting. Have you read that?
Yeah.
I highly recommend it. It's an article written by a heterosexual white male talking about privilege and how to explain it without using the word privilege, because straight white men often hear that, and
Right.
the word is an alarm bell for them, and they tune
Right.
out after that. So
Yeah.
I highly recommend it. So straight white male, the lowest difficulty setting there is, and it talks about in game metaphors.
Yeah, that's John Scalzi, I believe. Scalzi, sorry. I've only seen it in print, so I have no idea how to say it. But so to answer your first, to be frank, it is unsafe to go and be public. You're going to get hurt. I'm not gonna lie. I have been very open about what my identity is, who I am, and my intentions. I've gotten a lot of death threats and rape threats. I've had my blog hacked with pornography. I feel I would be dishonest if I didn't say that. But the good thing about all this is that for every person who's done that, I have had a person who said, I now feel more comfortable talking because you're doing it. And so I think that we have to have a conversation about a balance between safe spaces and advocacy, and to understand that everyone has a different place that they need to be. I am fortunate enough in my life where I will not be detrimental to my own being if I was out and an activist. And I understand that a lot of people can't. So I would never say to someone who thinks that they will become harmful to themselves in any manner if they got a terrible response, I would never tell that person to go and be an activist. That's just terrible. Because also something I like to say is that being an activist also means just being present. And I want people to know that being rah, I'm, on the White House lawn is not necessarily the only way for you to be an activist. Being a present, just I'm, a programmer, I'm, LGBT and whatever, and then that's kind of activism in its own weird way, because then all these other people will now feel a lot more comfortable to at least engage that, and possibly they might be LGBT themselves and felt scared because they thought everyone else wasn't. So that's kind of my thing. I don't want to be dishonest and tell people that it's not a harmful arena, but we all are in together. There's a lot of resources and solidarity, and people I know my personal Twitter following is wonderful because it's nice and curated, so I know no one says crappy things on there, and that's very important, especially if you're on social media. I would say find an auxiliary way to find people who challenge your viewpoints in the way, don't let that be the only thing you see all the time, because you're just gonna be burned out. I really tried that whole I'm gonna be, well, it doesn't work. Keep it where people who will engage with you in a respectful manner at all times. You have no obligation to educate anyone, period. And then to your second point, I think that a lot of people have different skills. I come from academia, and I do have a personal proclivity for using, certain terms and whatever. And over the years, I have become a lot more open to the public with my writing. But the thing is that we do need people doing different things. I don't think every single person should speak to straight men, to be quite honest, because they can research, I'm not saying that straight men do this, because the thing that I really dislike right now is that we have wonderful allies. I have so many wonderful allies in my life, just to say, wonderful allies. And one thing in common that they do is that they research, without me saying things. They're I heard you said something, I didn't understand it, so I went and looked it up, and now I understand it. Can we talk about that? That's totally cool. Someone was like, you just said that, and I have no idea, and I'm angry about it. And I'm like, dude, no. So it's kind of like, it's not going to work that way. And that's why I kind of find with a whole bunch of these people, it's not people who kind of like lay themselves out as a carpet for me to like stomp with my like, high heel like combat boots or something. It's not like that. It's people who want to engage with me on my topic, and you can still disagree, but like research and show like that. So I'm glad that people like John and other people are engaging with this and have that. And one thing is learning how to be a good public ally is a really important thing. So I would definitely go and look at other public allies to go and see like, how they do things and how do they do things without trampling over other people's identities and voices. Do we have any other questions? Hi.
Okay, there we go. If you could pick one studio or publisher, probably a big one, to have a big sit down and do like a course correction, either because they have the most to learn or the biggest offenders, who would you pick?
No pressure. This sounds like a trap. I don't know if I can really answer that only because there are so many. And what I would do, okay, here's what I would say right now. So right now, what I'm noticing even better is that there are people who are actually trying to do something. And I want to sit down with them and say, what's your process? Because I want to tell everyone else this now. And so that's kind of my, like right now I'm doing some individual consulting. I'm hearing about other processes and things that are going on right now. Like right now I just found out that EA has a diversity and inclusion coordinator, and I'm like, companies have that, what? And I don't think other companies have that, right? And so if they have something, if they have a program that's going on and it's working for them and things are going on, more companies need to learn that. So I would prefer to go to a company who seems to be the most active. I would say, like, at least for a big publisher, I would say EA seems to be doing things very aggressively. So I'm going to be like, okay, what's your process? And how can I either help or advise or just learn from it so I can tell other people? Because otherwise, like, and here's the thing, like right now we're saying that like kind of sexism and et cetera is a AAA problem. It is not. It is a society problem, and many of your favorite indie artists need a talk. And it's kind of like, and and the sucky part is that they're sometimes the worst to talk to, because like it's like we have like this idolization of these people and as if they can't do any wrong. And while I think they do some things right, they still get some things wrong. So there's more to be done than just to, I would say, crush evil publishers. So yeah. Any other questions?
Hey, this isn't really a question, but on the subject of giving love, I just wanted to say that I love your work on Border House.
Aww. Thank you.
I'm really excited to be seeing you talk in person. And I used to be a sexist female, like anti-ally, like one of those. And your work and you guys really converted me. And yeah, I used to make my friends' lives a lot more difficult, and now I stopped doing that. So you guys are great.
Oh, thank you. Yay. And the awesome part about that is that like these spaces are so open to that, because we understand that like not like kind of a weird thing that people think is like, oh, you're a woman, you're born with like a women's studies degree. That's not how it works. And so it's just like this thing that like, people, like everyone together, like I don't expect every single person who's LGBT to understand, to be queer studies majors. Like that's not how that works. So I'm so glad that the Border House and such, and I hope people are encouraged who are kind of familiar with it, are super open to people like, I fucked up in the past and I'm learning, I'm so encouraged, and these people will be so happy to help you. So I'm so happy to hear something like that. Thanks, really. Any other questions? Awesome.
I wonder if you had any recommendations for language to not shut down when you're trying to encourage, like I'm a web developer, and the site I was on, I was trying to encourage them to have more than gender binary on collecting data. It says, well, the feds require this, so we're not going to do anything more, sort of attitude came right back at me, and I'm trying to figure out a way to encourage them to be able to be more inclusive without, shutting them down, because it's like I was trying to, that's all I got was like, oh no, this is required, and so we're not going to do anything more.
Right. So my favorite tactic that I tell people, especially if you're doing like surveys or diagnostics or whatever, fill in blanks things is the easiest thing to do. If you're like, you want to find out someone's gender and it's a type in field, that automatically says to a person on a level, like, designate yourself in whatever way you want to, right? And what person's gonna say that's too hard to implement? That's, if they do, they should be fired.
They have to report, and so if they have to we're an educational institution, we have to report to the federal government on this, so.
Right. The federal government sucks at this badly. And this is, I'm gonna wrap this up real quick, but just to say this, basically what it is that what you can do, if a list of options is all you can do, is to try and go through a social justice website. Actually, the best thing to do is to look for media resources, like at glad.org. They have media guidelines, and they have words to use and not use. And all these other activist organizations have the same thing. So if you go there and be like, okay, I shouldn't be using this word for trans people, good to know. Unfortunately, a lot of journalists don't know this. But yeah, go to these activist organizations and they have guidelines and everything. And you can at least go through and say, I'll just avoid those words and include these words. And that's the best you can do with all those options, right? Let's try that. All right, thank you, everyone.